Hello and welcome to Wargaming Terrain Lessons Learnt. In this video, I'll be showcasing 5 years of progression in making jungle terrain and the lessons that I've learnt along the way. Much of what I'm going to talk about is applicable to any type of terrain that you plan to build. I hope that by the end of this video, you can take something away from what I've learnt and apply it to your own terrain projects. What you see here is the current state of our fantasy and urban jungle ruins terrain which we sell in our store. But let's take a step back in time to over 5 years ago, to when Go to Ground Wargaming was but a fledgling concept. A time when I was young and bold enough to list terrain so unappealing and downright ugly as that which you see before you. So, the first thing that's striking to me looking back on this is the square bases that I've used here to make the jungle terrain. The wood that's used in these bases is similar, although I use a higher grade of MDF now. This is 3mm MDF. Them being square for a type of terrain such as jungle that is supposed to be organic in nature, that is supposed to be fluid, is a real problem. Because them being square, it really limits how you can set them out on your table. I've got a picture coming up. This was an attempt to make the terrain look more natural with square bases. Now the reason I used square bases, I think, was simply out of not knowing any better. They were easy to produce. You know, if you have a big 6 foot by 4 foot slab of MDF, cutting it into squares was just the thing I did, and then I started slapping on jungle terrain. It wasn't something that I'd learnt yet, that more fluent bases, more rounded bases were sort of a requirement for this type of terrain. Now, you might get away with square bases on something like urban terrain, you know, buildings and ruins, because them in nature are more rigid. But for this type of terrain, to me, it really just stands out. It's the first thing I look at. The first thing I notice when I look at this type of terrain is just how unappealing the bases are, really. And that's a shame, because the terrain itself isn't great, but with fluid bases, which you'll see later, it could definitely be improved. I think that's one of the main early things and the main mistakes that I see in people that are new to creating terrain for wargaming, creating modular terrain. Boards themselves, obviously, it doesn't apply to that, but the easiest terrain to get into, the easiest place to start, is in modular terrain. And one of the very easy things you can do to improve how your terrain looks is simply round the bases, make them organic, make them fluent, I guess. I know these are fancy words for rounder edges, and I'll show you examples of that later. Another further, the bases themselves aren't actually beveled, which means to give them a angle on the edge, and that allows it so if this white space is the board, there's like a ramp up to the base itself, and it doesn't sound that important or impressive, but it does make a difference. A lot of wargaming bases themselves for models have this beveled effect, where there's a right angle leading up to the base. I guess the human eye picks up on a lot of things subconsciously that we take for granted, and that would be one of them. And finally, the final striking thing for me about this terrain, I'm not even going to get started on this piece. That's supposed to be a monument, like a monolith or something. Look at it. Well, okay, so it's like all one slab. Each layer is just one slab of foam board. And yeah, there are these decorations around which break it up a bit, and I do like that, but I don't know, man. I'm not a fan of that. But you know, it's very early days. So the third thing that's very striking to me is the lack of variation in the plants that I used. These I bought from a local building yard. They were wall ivy, is what they were meant to be. I cut them into sections and glued them onto the base. But as you can see, there's only one variation. Now, this doesn't have to be a problem if that's all you're working with the terrain that you're building. If you've got one variation like this, you could easily just like spray paint 3 different shades, say. So if you get 1 or 2 shades of green, a shade of yellow, maybe slap in there some red or something, and you spray from a distance these clumps of plants, you can get, you know, and then mix them up and put them in patches. So you would have like a patch of green, and then a couple yellow, and maybe like a more ready one. I'm not saying fully yellow and fully red or anything like that, but you know, like shade a like a third of your plants an interesting color, and that would really break it up, and that would be really easy to do. That another small difference that would really make a big impact, I think, because this just doesn't look natural, and also that very impractical. Like, who wants to play on what looks like just a bush? So I'm going to show you the second set now. So this is the second set that I made, and this was probably about 3.5 years ago or so. I mean, big differences already, big changes. I guess I was already learning from the first set's mistakes. First of all, there's these larger flora types, and they're in the center of each model. And from there, I build outwards with the different types of plant. There's, I think, 5 different types here, and it's not bad. I mean, the image quality isn't great. Like, the lighting, that's terrible. I still haven't beveled the edges, so as you can see, I still don't have that little ramp going up. But I have attempted to round them here. Now, this is a bit of a half-hearted effort, because in essence this is still a square base. It's just I've cut down the corners. Now, that doesn't get rid of the fundamental issue, which is that it still looks pretty natural. It's okay. It doesn't look great though. And the one benefit of having square tiles, which is that the pieces fit together perfectly, that's now gone. So I haven't actually improved it to a satisfying quality, and I've taken away the one benefit of having square tiles, because when you place these together, there's these little right angle sections, which I think I've quite cleverly covered up in the pictures. Well, no, I haven't really actually cleverly. I've been able to point them out. So that's another issue with this. Like, I guess this is a transition, but apparently I was pretty stubborn with using fluid bases for some reason. I think it was just a creative block. The terrain here doesn't look, in my opinion, this cluster of plants doesn't look great. It doesn't look too natural. It doesn't look too thick. Looks a bit sporadic and a bit empty, and I guess I think that comes from having too small bases and trying to do too much on them. So for some reason, I was stuck on the idea of using a bunch of really small bases. These are about 8 inch by 4 inch, I think. Maybe a bit different to that. And then a couple large ones. And these were meant to sort of satellite the larger pieces of terrain. So the problem with that was that I couldn't really get much out of these bases, these small ones. These big ones are alright. These aren't bad. I mean, I don't really like the flocking, and I'm not sure if that's just the bad lighting, but I think the quality of the flock here is really quite amateur. Not sure why that is. I mean, I guess I could make a guess, which is that I was amateur at making the flock back then. Oops, embarrassing. I mean, that's out of focus, but whatever. I'm focusing too much on the flock, pun intended, sort of. So yeah, you can't tell it as much on these larger bases, but these smaller ones, I just don't have the space to do enough. And when it's clumped together, like in this picture, it looks good. You know, it's not bad. It's not bad. I don't like this much red. This red plant, I don't like that being everywhere. And actually, in hindsight, a bit of something behind the stage. Oh, I don't know what the idiom is. These red plants, I haven't been able to find a supplier of these since making this set, and that I use them very sporadically now. As a result, and looking on this, it's like I indulged in these red plants. I'm gonna make a video on making jungle terrain at some point, and one thing that I could talk about for quite a while is the difficulty with getting a good variety of plants, especially because of the fact that a lot of the time you're going to be buying from Chinese dealers, and a lot of the time this plant here that you see, this one here, the fern sort of bush, they will list all of these plants. They will list them with even like stuff like this. They will list them with these pictures, as being these interesting plants, and then they'll send you these little fern bushes, and it's ridiculous. I have I have drawers full of these fern bushes which I've gotten a return on. Well, I got a refund on, because they're listed as like these interesting plants. So it's really difficult. You have to like almost invest where you get your money back, but you have to really shop around to get these jungle plants I find. Then again, maybe I just haven't looked locally hard enough. Whatever. So this is the second step. Some improvements, but fundamentally it doesn't really solve the issues of the first set, I don't believe. Now, this is the third set, and when I say set, I sort of mean the third time I went back to the drawing board with jungle terrain, because I really wanted to make jungle terrain work, and I think this terrain was made about 2 years ago. Improvements already, generally bigger base size. I've added things to the terrain, you know, these ruins, these urban ruins. Starting to experiment with what I can get out of the jungle terrain. Can't see it too well, but there's some tank traps in here as well. Trying to make like a sci-fi sort of appeal to it. Better base size means that models can fit on them easier for area terrain effects. We've got a larger variety of plants here as well. Like these sort of, I don't know what sort of you would call that, umbrella sort of plants. They work really well towards the edges. So when I was building this terrain, one thing that I kept in mind was having the same species of plant, if you can call it that, in the center, this long taller plant, and then with slightly smaller plants towards the edges, you know, more bushy ones, and then they sort of dissipate into these more ferny ones, and that kind of gives it a nice natural effect, I believe. I managed to source 3 different types of these sort of satellite, these plants, these ones on the edges, and yeah, I think it gives enough variation. Christ, the lighting is way different there. Enough variation to make a difference. Still, like this model, for example, I don't know if you can see it very well. It's this one. There isn't very much room for models to be placed on there. It's sort of like an absolute mess of jungle. And I guess the idea of that was that it would block line of sight, would block true line of sight, you know, for 8th edition 40k. And it does, but that's all it does, which isn't really that impressive or useful. One issue that I was having with making this set was, and this is a fairly common problem with terrain, I guess if you're starting out you might not know how to solve it or whatever, but was using a glue gun. So I switched from using PVA glue to using hot glue, a glue gun, to make these models to stick the plants onto the base. Now, the reason I did that was because the glue gun, it's more durable when you use it right than the PVA glue. However, also it dries much quicker. So when I was making these, if I was working on this, for example, if I was using PVA glue and I want to make this cluster, I'd be constantly knocking all the plants out of place because the PVA glue takes like 2 days to dry properly. Glue gun, it's like 30 seconds. Problem with that though is glue gun requires, I believe you would say friction. I'm not sure on that. It requires a rough texture in order to glue to. So the MDF bases that we're using were flat. They have no texture to them. You know, they're smooth. So when you try and glue gun onto that, you have difficulties. When you try and PVA onto that, you have difficulties as well. But yeah, so I had issues. These would just peel off a lot of the time, and that was really unappealing. Pun very much intended. So I fixed that by set number 5. This is the first serialized product. I think serialized is the right word, but the first serialized product for my store. Forgotten Civilization. It's fancy ruined jungle terrain. Pretty good. I mean, the lighting's good for the photography. But as I was saying, the way I fixed my glue gun issue was, first of all, on the MDF, before I did anything else, I would put a layer of sand flock. So I would paint the MDF brown, and then I would apply the layer of sand flock, and the sand flock don't need glue, it just sticks to the paint, and it sticks solid, because when the paint dries, it solidly holds the fine sand to the base, and that gives a rough enough texture that you can easily use a glue gun or PVA glue. I prefer a glue gun, it's much better for when you're making a lot, to glue the plants to the base, and then they're pretty sturdy. So that's how I got around that. Now, this a lot of the lessons I've learned are in effect, with the way that the jungle plants are sort of naturally done, with the fluidness of the bases. This allows you to place them together in interesting ways that look very natural. Like, compare this to the squares that I showed you in the first set. Absolute world of difference. So one thing I'd like to talk about this set though is, if you're making a lot of terrain, like a board's worth like this is, what I had in mind, and this goes back all the way to the first set that I showed you, was that you want only a few larger pieces of terrain and more small ones. So here I've got one really big jungle ruin in the center, and I've got even three medium-sized, and then 3 very small ruins, and then 14 small jungle tiles. I used to be a fan of this design. I'm not anymore, for a few reasons. One, like I said earlier, a small base doesn't allow you to do very much on the base with your terrain. It doesn't really allow very much space for units to be placed. The small tiles are useful, and I like them, but they shouldn't be the majority, in my opinion. So, like here, for example, I'm trying to do a little ruin, and it's like cute, but yeah, I think you can do better than that. These are nice and big. These are good. It's just when you've got so many small ones and that they're the center of your table, they're like the meat and gravy, or whatever the phrase is, of your table. It can be a bit annoying to sort of set up. I don't know, it's a minor, I guess it's a minor complaint. So this is the final set. This is what we sell in our store right now. If you were to go off total base size, there would be more in this set than there was in the previous one that I showed. Even though there's less models in total, like I was saying, a lot more medium-sized models. This is our large jungle set, by the way, designed to fit on a 6-foot by 4-foot board. These models have plenty space for units to be placed inside for area terrain. Also, using this many large or medium-sized bases allows for a lot more of the specific variation, in this case fantasy ruins, because these smaller jungle tiles, there isn't really space for ruins and jungle on them. As you can see here as well, this is a large set of urban ruins, and these smaller jungle tiles sort of stitch together the meat and gravy, which is either was a phrase or now is, of your terrain set. But the meat and gravy stop saying meat and gravy. But the centerpiece of the set is the proper, the ruins and the jungle itself. So that's the progression that I have made so far. That's been 5 years of sort of experimenting with jungle terrain. Maybe in 5 years' time I will have something absolutely mind-blowing to compare to this terrain. I sort of doubt it though. I think this is the apex of wargaming scenery worldwide. That was a joke. Thank you for watching this video. I will have more videos of this nature coming out soon, on different types of terrain. So, like fantasy ruins, urban ruins, crystal terrain. That's going to be an interesting one. Check out our website for more jungle terrain and hobby supplies. I can guarantee you that there's a lot of terrain on there and other products that you won't find on any other store. All of our scenery is handmade, so that no two models are the same. We're passionate about scenery and we believe it shows. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and happy wargaming.